Hi everyone, I'm Allison and I've been an AP teacher for 12 years. Of the 5 different AP subjects that I've taught, AP Psychology is by far my favorite. I really like learning all about how and what influences our behavior and our thought processes. So tonight we're going to talk about how we physically develop from conception to death. So let's get started. Okay. If you have other AP classes, then you want to check out these streams. If you will now respond in the chat box if you have any semester AP classes. Does that apply to anybody? One of my biggest struggles as a teacher was getting my students to manage their time better. It was difficult for them to review the AP exam material while working on their more immediate assignments like a paper or a test that week, especially for my kids who had me first semester. And so they finished their course in mid-December and then didn't take the exam until May. So I was wanting to know if that applies to anybody out there. So what's good about what Fiveable is doing now is that each day and each hour is a different AP exam. So you can know that you can come here every week. I have a question come in. Hold on one second. Okay. So upcoming streams for AP Psychology is mostly on the motivation unit. So we're going to talk about different motivations, emotion, Freud and his thoughts on what motivates us, as well as other personality theories. As always, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram and subscribe to YouTube. We'll have lots of great videos and informative content on those social media platforms. So today we're just going to talk about the development unit. We will also talk about physical development and gender and sexuality. I doubt we'll have time to go over the other parts of the development unit, which are cognitive, social, and moral development, but we've got you covered because we've got a great review right up before the AP exam. We'll be reviewing Unit 6 and 7 for an hour. Okay. So if you see there on the slide, there on the left, it tells you the different standards that are in this development unit. It's one of the smaller ones for the AP exam. Today we're going to be talking about standards 6.1 and then parts of 6.4 and 5 that deal with physical development. And then we'll also talk about gender and sexual orientation. At the end of today's lesson, if we have time, we'll review the social, cognitive, and moral development sections if we have some time. The box on the right shows the terms that we're going to discuss today. If you will use the poll to rate your familiarity with the terms, 1 being, I've never seen this before in my life, I'm crying, as the emoji, as you can see with the emoji, and 5, that you could explain the term well to a friend. So if you will use the poll feature to show me your familiarity with these concepts. Okay. All right, so let's get started. We've got a lot to talk about, as you can see. Okay, so development covers conception to death. So we're going to talk about before you're even born, the prenatal period. We'll talk about childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Again, today we're going to emphasize the physical development piece, but just know that there's a lot of information about cognitive, social, and moral development. We also talk a lot in this unit about nature versus nurture. So nature is that biological component that expresses our behavior. So like what part of our behavior is determined biologically, and then what part is learned through social interactions, but also your environment. So I don't know if you guys caught the Super Bowl commercial with Bryan Cranston dressed up like the twins from The Shining. But this kind of gives you a clue as to what kind of studies help us figure out whether or not something is, some part of our behavior is because of nature or nurture. All right, so anybody know the types of studies that deal with discerning is something nature or nurture? Is some piece of behavior nature or nurture? Okay, so it's twin studies. The Minnesota twin studies have given us a great deal of information about whether or not certain characteristics that we have are inborn traits or if they're because of the environment. Because what they did is they studied twins who have been separated at birth and raised apart to see what they still had in common, what those twins who were raised apart still had in common. If they had something in common, then obviously that is going to be due to nature or a biological reason. If they don't have that in common, we could say that it could be because of their environment that they were raised in. So maturation is really the biological growth processes. So here we're really looking mostly at nature, although there are some social components to some of the things that we'll be talking about. But for the most part, maturation, or that physical development, is looking at the biological growth processes that are determined basically from birth. Okay. So in the prenatal environment, there's actually things that go on inside the mother's womb that actually has an effect on our behavior and our capabilities when we're born. So the conception point is when fertilization of the egg creates a zygote. The embryonic phase is from 2 to 8 weeks and begins with implantation. So when the zygote travels down the fallopian tubes and implants. The fetal stage is from 9 weeks to birth. We say that viability, which means the ability for the fetus to live outside the womb, generally happens around 6 months. But while the fetus is in the womb, lots of factors can affect how that child would do later. For example, if the mother is getting proper nutrition, The illnesses she faces. I know that when I was pregnant with my first child, I had that was my second child. I had hand, foot, and mouth disease because my first child, that's something that they pick up a lot in daycare. So my first child gave that to me. And I was really kind of worried about how that would affect my second child, who was still in my womb. Obviously, substance abuse is no good. In fact, I've got a quick story to share. There is a case in my town right now where the mother ingested some methamphetamines right as she was giving birth. So right before she got to the hospital, but she was already in labor. And so she is being tried for harming that fetus because it was born, but then it died shortly after it was birthed. So that's an unfortunate, obviously, situation. But there's all kinds of different toxins, which are teratogens, are different toxins that you can consume and that could hurt the fetus. Alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, to a certain extent, can all cause some negative outcomes for children. Fetal alcohol syndrome, and if you see there with the graphic down at the bottom, it can cause both physical symptoms and cognitive delays, and that is when the mother ingests quite a bit of alcohol while she's pregnant. It's generally not going to happen if the mother has like one glass of wine, but the more the mother drinks, the worse the symptoms can be. Okay. So now I want to talk about, after the baby's born, what happens in infancy to its physical development. So we can see that infants are really responsive to the environmental changes after they're born. For a while, psychologists thought that babies did not really take in much right when they're born, like that they were blind and couldn't see or feel or hear much. That's just not the case. And how we know this is we can see from monitoring their gaze and also their heart rate what they attend to. And we also know, because of those things, because of monitoring their gaze and their heart rate, that they're able to even respond and know physical happenings within the womb. So like they can hear the mother and the father's voice. Now they can't understand what they're saying, but they can hear the voice. When the baby is born, there are certain reflexes like rooting, sucking, grasping, the Babinski reflex and the Moro reflex that aid them in their survival. So the rooting reflex is if you touch the baby's cheek, the baby will turn to you. And so that helps them with nursing as well as sucking, grasping, holding on to things. And let me try to click on these links to show you the Babinski reflex and the Moro reflex. Let's see if it works.
Testing the Babinski reflex in infants. The Babinski reflex can be tested in infants by firmly stroking the sole of the foot with a finger or a blunt object along the lateral side from the heel to the toes. Typically in infants, a tonic dorsiflexion of the big toe as well as a plantar flexion and spreading of the small toes occur together. This is known as the Babinski sign and is physiologically present in infants until between 12 and 24 months of age. Afterwards, the sign may indicate damage to the corticospinal tract.
Okay, hopefully you guys just saw that. It pulled up for me. The Moro reflex.
What habits did you change when we moved in together?
Oh no, this is not. Now it made my. If you guys will give me just 1 second, I have to pull up my PowerPoint again, or my Google Slides. Okay, I'm not going to click on the Moro reflex because I'm afraid that it's going to make my presentation go away again. So let's just talk about the Moro reflex without watching the video. Basically, the Moro reflex is that you take your finger or some other object, or like blunt object, and you rub it up against the infant's foot and it spreads its toes. Some of these reflexes, we don't really know why the babies have these reflexes, like what evolutionary purpose they serve. But obviously, rooting, sucking, and grasping, we can understand that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I call this Moro? Babinski is where you rub the foot and the toe spread. The Moro reflex is where the baby goes, oh! It's basically a startle response. And my babies did this all the time. And it's really difficult not to laugh because it's really funny, although it does cause them some disturbance because they get scared. So in childhood, kids will develop some motor skills. Gross motor skills are skills that they use with their large muscles. So when they are sitting up or crawling, standing, walking, fine motor skills are skills that they'll need with using their small muscles, coordinating both their hands and their fingers with their eyes. And so I have a question mark here. Is this nature or nurture? Well, it's mostly nature. So it's mostly biological, being able to have, like, when these skills emerge. However, in some cultures, we see that babies or infants, toddlers are able to walk before others. And usually it has to do with environmental things that allow them to do that. So like greater spaces, parents who don't pick them up all the time. So parenting can be involved here too. And so that can impede or just make them not be able to walk as quickly as in some other cultures. So we do see some environmental impact on physical development with motor skills, but largely it is a biological process. All right. So I've got a few more people in the room now. If you can see everything and hear everything and are open to answering questions, give me a shout. Or if you have any questions, please put it in the chat bar or down in the little tool that says ask a question. Okay. So when puberty sets in, this is when children have entered into adolescence, and this is when the person is sexually mature and can reproduce. So we have a menarche, which is the first menstrual cycle or menstrual period that a young woman will get. And sometimes psychologists will refer to a spermarche, which is when young men will have their first ejaculation, generally at night. Primary sex characteristics are the actual physical genitals. Secondary sex characteristics are the changing of voice, the development of hair in different parts of all the different parts of the body that may get hair with puberty. You'll see a growth spurt here. Again, nature is mostly to not, I guess, blame, but biology is the cause for this. However, nurture or the environment can also play a role here. For example, in wealthier countries, adolescence and puberty will happen earlier, mostly because of better nutrition. Now, the timing of puberty, which generally happens earlier for girls than it does for boys, can have some social and emotional effects, particularly with girls. If girls develop earlier, they're more likely to be anxious than when boys develop earlier. So, after adolescence, we have adulthood. There's 3 parts of adulthood: early, middle, and late. And early adulthood is when you're supposed to be at your physical peak, unless, of course, you peaked in high school, then I guess that would be in your adolescence. So middle adulthood generally is when women have undergo menopause. And menopause is basically the opposite of the menarche. It's when you lose your menstrual cycle and you're no longer able to bear children. Men don't face a similar thing. However, as they age, the sperm count does decrease in men. In late adulthood, this is when we see chronic illnesses like heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's start to happen. Gerontology is a field of medicine and psychology that helps people deal with the aging process. Kubler-Ross, with her 5 stages of grief, or this also deals with how you process death, or your own death or others. So there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. There have been some critiques of her idea here that you don't move through these stages quite chronologically, but most people still think that this was a monumental, or this was a big deal, because this is the first time that really people had studied psychological ponderings about death. Okay. So there's some things that we can do to slow the signs of aging. For example, intermittent fasting is supposed to help you slow down those signs, but definitely getting exercise and eating right helps you slow down the aging process. So, sex and gender development. Sex is definitely different than gender, and I think that we as a society are figuring these things out, right? So sex is the biological or the nature side, whereas gender is more like a social or cultural behavior characteristics that are shown. So sex has to do with the X and Y chromosome. However, there's more things. It's like more complicated than we once thought. But we do know that the mother always donates the X and the father donates either an X or a Y. So if it's an XX, if you have 2 X chromosomes, then you are a female. And if you have an X and a Y, then you are male. Some people, though, have physical characteristics of both sexes, and we call those people who have that are considered intersex. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have both physical genitalia, but it can mean that they have more testosterone, for example, in women. Now, testosterone is not solely a male hormone. Women have testosterone too, but when women have elevated levels of testosterone, it can have some showing physically. For example, there's been a big controversy over female athletes with higher levels of testosterone. This young woman here that's shown in the picture, she has been ordered to decrease her levels of testosterone if she wants to compete on women's teams in the Olympics, and that's been quite controversial. So gender, as opposed to sex, again, is how we show cultural, psychological, and behavioral characteristics. Gender identity can be different, as we all know, than biological sex. People who are androgynous may show gender, like both genders. And there's my favorite androgynous person, David Bowie. So here I want to talk about how gender roles are primarily a nurture thing. Now, some people think that it could be biological in that testosterone can influence aggression. However, there's been a lot of research that says socialization really fosters some gender roles. And in fact, it begins at birth. You know, when a boy is born, everything's blue, and when a girl is born, everything is pink. And that has been the case for a long time, but having boys wear blue clothes and girls wear pink clothes, that has really started after like massive consumerism, mostly because clothing manufacturers wanted us to not like use hand-me-downs. So most clothing, as you can see there in the picture, most clothing, it didn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, was white. And it was, you know, a lot of people, boys even wore skirts. So there's two ways that we have, that psychologists have talked about gender and socialization, and that is the social learning theory by Bandura, which basically says that we learn from our parents or our models in how to behave. So if a boy falls and skins his knee and starts to cry, if he is punished for that, you know, with a frown and not receiving any kind of attention by his parents, any positive attention, then he grows up to think that men cannot express emotions. Whereas if a girl falls and she expresses sadness by crying and she is comforted, then it shows that it's okay for girls to express emotions. And that comes from our learning from our family members, from our greater community. Gender schema theory is a little bit different though, although it's kind of along the same lines, but here what we're talking about is that boys and girls have this schema or this idea of what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a girl, and then they kind of fix that. They fixate on that, and so it doesn't change much. For example, they overgeneralize. They hear that boys don't wear skirts, boys wear pants, not skirts, and they're a girl, and they say, oh, I can't wear pants, okay, because that's what a boy does. And we do see that happens, that young children have very fixed ideas about gender. Okay, so the AP standards include a standard about sexual orientation, which is a pattern of romantic and or sexual attraction to the same gender or to opposite genders. And on the definition, as I researched it, it said like a fixed pattern. However, we see more and more talk about sexual fluidity, that sexuality can change, as well as not being attracted to either gender, which is being asexual. Okay, so I wanted to bring those up as well. Okay, all right, so if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat box. Again, I want you to, if you can, follow us on Twitter with Think Fiveable, or Instagram, subscribe on YouTube. I have a relatively recently created Twitter feed called Allie P for AP. So if you could go there and give me a follow, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, I just started it, so that's why I have like all of 7 followers. So someday it'll climb, and I would love for you to help me with that. So if you have any questions, I'll be available. Thanks so much.